Hello, everyone. Today we are going to be stringing on a constant pull machine, and the machine that we're looking at is the Tecnifibre Ergo Pro. When I first got it, it had a little ATP sticker on the front, but it was just kind of annoying me because it wasn't really sticking very well, so I pulled that off. And with this machine, we have plenty of different options. We have the ability for increasing the tension on one pull with the knot button, and then the option to bring the tension down for the crosses, which is constant. So if you click the one for the crosses, it's going to remain down until you click it again to go back to your default tension. In the back here, we're looking at the little clicker that you go into every time you pull the string through. And if you do have this machine, every month or so, you might want to just give that a tiny little screw just to make sure that it's staying where you want it to be. So I have mine where the screw just pops through the other end, but over time it will kind of loosen with the number of rackets that you do. You can see we have some different speed settings. That's what I was clicking before, and the little icon of the person running dictates that. None of them are particularly fast, so I think for a lot of people, you might just set it onto 4. For whatever reason, I like it in between version 2 and 3. The other sort of extravagance of this machine is that you can bring it up and down electronically, which again, do you really need that? Probably not, but it is a feature of the machine. So now we're looking at that cross button, which is going to lower it, and then we clicked the knot button, which is going to raise it, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. We also have the pre-stretch, which we are not using in this video, but maybe in a future video, we'll use the pre-stretch just so you can see it. You input your tension like so, and you are good to go there. So you can go to decimal points. You can also set it to pounds versus kilograms. There's all sorts of different things. The mounting setup, very simple, 6-point mounting. You'll see me mount a racket in a second. And here we have our swivel clamps, which again, they are very straightforward. You can tighten the grip of those right there. And that's one of the most important things when it comes to stringing a tennis racket. And that just takes experience to know the sort of tightness that you want to feel, depending on the string that you're using. We also have a brake button, which when that is pressed, it locks the machine, it locks that turntable. Very useful, especially if you're stringing like those O-port rackets, which I had one yesterday, actually, I was stringing. And that plus that little thing feeding into the jaws, and we'll see that when I'm actually stringing, it makes those very easy. The last thing we're going to look at before we start stringing the racket is the string measurer. Now, you're probably not ever going to use this, especially as you get more and more experienced, but you can see by default it has a 33.4 setting on there, which if we were doing one piece would probably be just the right amount of string to use for most rackets, at least 16 by 19 rackets. So you pull it in, you start pulling it through, and it's going to then give you a readout on how much string you've pulled. The thing that's different about this machine compared to the other ones we've looked at is the distance to the tension head is so much greater. So I found, especially with 18 by 20 rackets or oversized rackets, you really have to pull a little bit extra string. It's always better to pull too much than to pull too little. And then for me, I really don't use the measuring tool, but I do clip on this side of it just because I don't want to pull anything back out on my reel, but honestly, I don't think it matters. So we get an extra like 6 inches or so as we pull that through. And there's our string, and that is what we're going to be using for our mains. So just like in all the previous videos, this is the most basic of techniques on how to string. We're going to do 2-piece, which equals 4 knots. With the mounting, I've actually braked the turntable, and then I'm first going to start by doing the head and the throat, and this is a really easy machine to set up. You just kind of turn those two things until you lock it into place. And to be totally honest with you, you probably wouldn't even need to use the other 4, but it's always good just for a little extra security and to make sure that your racket is in there perfectly straight to screw that in until it's just touching and you don't feel like the frame is going to move around too much. You don't want it to be super tight because then you don't allow the frame to flex and to move, which is something that it is designed to do, kind of like a bow. I've unbraked the machine. And yeah, now we're going to get going. So I know this isn't the greatest view in the world, probably the worst view, but if you've watched the previous videos, nothing is really going to change that much except for how we start our mains. And then we're also going to be using a starting clamp for our crosses. So I will talk about that just a little bit, and there will be other videos posted with better views of the actual stringing process without any commentary, just so you can see what it's like to go and string a tennis racket. So because we have 6 holes in the bottom, we're going to start at the bottom. If we had 8, we would start at the top. It makes sense when it comes to pulling the string through. It's something that once you start stringing rackets, you understand very quickly. And now I'm just pinching both and I'm pulling through and pulling through evenly so that we have the same amount of string on each side. If you want to double check, like in the previous videos, you could walk that out and make sure it's the same distance. So to start our mains, I'm going to pull both strings, and I put one around one side of that little thing in the front and one around the other side, pulling down nice and strong to make sure both are in that clicker and both are being held on to about the same if possible. I didn't get this perfectly straight, which is something that you'd probably want, but it's good enough. So I go ahead and I attach the clamp inside the racket and then the starting clamp to the outside on the same side. Now we pull the opposite side, and once we pull that opposite side, we are going to do 3 mains on that first side and then go back to the other side for 6, come back to the first side and finish it off, and then finally go back to the other side. So some of this is going to be cut off, but I want to leave a little bit more in here so we could actually talk about this machine and like who this is for. And personally, I think unless you're trying to impress people, and unless you kind of have a stringing business, there's no reason to necessarily invest in one of these constant pull machines. Overall, from start to finish, to do a racket, and it's not a polyester or not a complicated racket, you can get it done in 20 to 25 minutes, which is definitely faster than the other 2 machines. But again, for most people, unless you're stringing every day, that doesn't really matter that much. But for me, this is a nice machine to have. Is it really what I need, or is it more than what I need? It's definitely more than what I need, but it does the job, and I just kind of like it because it's cool. It's going to take me years to actually pay it off, so it's a good thing that, you know, my livelihood isn't tied to stringing. So we've done 3, and now we've come back to the first side, and we've pulled tension, and now we're going to go ahead and clip on. Okay, and now we're going to do 6 on this side. So just like that, we're off to the races. This is our normal way of working that we've looked at in all of the previous videos. This machine is pretty expensive. It's definitely on the pricier side. There are constant pull machines for much less. I think it's kind of this machine, the Bayardo, the top one from Babolat, and the top one from Yonex. Those are kind of the best machines on the market today, and they're all pretty good. Now, we've come back in towards the end because I am going to do one thing and use one feature of the machine. So let's go ahead and clamp this off, and I'm going to use that knot button for the final pull of the mains, and that knot button is going to increase the tension by 4 pounds just for one pull. So that is something that you see people do to try to get a higher dynamic tension. I'm just doing it to show you that the machine can do it. So I press the button. Now that's pulling it 4 pounds tighter than what we're set at. So from 55, it goes to 59. The moment I click that button again, it then resets the tension back to 55. Since I have to go to the other side, that's being pulled at 55. And then for the final one, we're going to be going to 59 again. So I hit the button, we go through, and that is going to be our mains done. We're just tying off the same way we've always tied off. Very simple, double half hitch. Which if you're a beginner stringing, that's the way to go. It's a bulky knot. It's not a particularly pretty knot, but it does hold up under scrutiny. So we'll go in and tie off here. As I mentioned before, we will have some other videos coming out, including how to bridge using a starting clamp. We'll also look at the around the world method, and then I think I might just put out one more video with a better camera angle so you can really see what's going on the top here, and I'll just do that with no commentary for you guys in case people are curious. Otherwise, at this point, I can pretty much stop talking until we get to the crosses. When we go to the crosses, we are going to use a little bit of a different method than we've used before. And it's, again, that this kind of standard practice if you have swivel clamps, as we have here, and you have this kind of 6-point mounting system. And when we looked at the Neos, we didn't have swivel clamps, so we were kind of restricted in when we were doing our crosses. But luckily this time, we're not going to be restricted at all. And yeah, we'll look at that in a second. So mains done. We'll have to cut another piece of string, a little bit less than what we used for the mains, and we will be good to go. So I'm going to go ahead and unclamp just to let those strings kind of settle a little bit. I like having the clamps on for as short a time as possible. That's just a personal preference. You'll see people leave the clamps on when they transition to the crosses. I don't do that. Again, that's just a personal thing. So we're pulling our cross string now through the top cross. So we're not using a starting knot. We are going to use the starting clamp. And we go through, and when I go through, what I'm going to do is just pull it through enough to reach the tension head. Okay, because I'm going to need to pull the tension again before I tie off. And for me, with the crosses, I will, I'm using the button again. I'm going to reduce the tension by 3 pounds overall from 55 to 53. And luckily, I just have a cross button I can click on this machine. It's like a preset that sets it down. But for the first two, I'm going to pull, or for the first one, excuse me, I will pull at 55 pounds. And for the last one, I will pull at 55 pounds. Just because, again, that makes the overall dynamic tension a little bit closer to the reality. So I've done the first one. I'm now going to go ahead and do the second one. And then once I have that second one good to go, I'm going to pull through a decent amount, okay? Because I don't need all of that string on the first side to get to the tension head. I'm doing the one ahead method here. And I think when we have the other video come out, it will look a little bit clearer. So now I'll go and I'll set up the starting clamp. All right, I just kind of do it to where the holes are on the starting clamp. That seems to work well. And now we're going to pull the very first one. Make sure that you don't grab the side of the string that's going into the second cross. And we pull our tension and we see that it sinks in like so. So after I've pulled tension on that first one at 55 pounds, I'm going to hit the cross button on this machine. Let's see when I do it. There it is. And now for the rest of the way until the final one, we're going to be going at 52 pounds. Now, there is a method to the madness in when you pull tension again on that starting clamp. So what we're going to do is we're going to do 3 pulls. So we've currently done 1. So we're going to be doing a second, a third, and then we get back to the fourth one. That is when we go in the starting clamp in the outside of the frame. So we can just kind of let this play through until then. I wish I had more to say, but I really don't. If you have questions or comments or concerns, feel free to leave those in the comment section here. Again, there's no like right or wrong way to do stringing. This is just one method, and hopefully it's helpful for some of you guys out there. And I just wanted you to see the difference between all the different tensioning methods and some of the different mounting systems. I really love this mounting system because it's so easy and it's so quick. Okay, so we've now pulled the second one. If you noticed, I put my fingers on the strings when I was pulling tension, and that's just to try to make the strings go through straight. If you don't do that, you'll notice that there's a little bit of a Ewing that occurs, and after you finish stringing the racket, it's never a good idea to be having to do lots and lots of string straightening. You don't want to do that. So as straight as you can get it when you're pulling tension, the better. And obviously you always want to be trying to go into the tension head as straight as you can. So if you notice when I pull tension, you rarely see the actual turntable move too much. Sometimes I make a little mistake and it happens, but that's what you're trying to avoid. So now we're on to number 3, and that is on the side opposite of where that starting clamp is. And now here's where we go, and we're going to do one more cross. We're going to at least do the weaving, and then we're going to come back and we're going to pull on the starting clamp one. So I think I'll grab that string and pop it up just so you can see the string is getting a little bit stuck. So I'm using my fingers, doing a little black magic here to make sure that that string doesn't crimp up or anything on itself. So now I need to come back to that one, but just to continue with what I've been doing, I'm going to string 1 ahead. So after you've pulled tension 3 times, you've done 3 crosses, that's when you come back to the outside of the frame and you're going to tie your knot, and then you will go down to the 4th one and you're good to go. And the reason for that is just now you're not asking the clamps, the swivel clamps, to do a whole lot. They're not holding tons of tension anywhere, so life is good. So I'm pulling here, all right, removing, and now I'm going to move that clamp from number 2 up to number 1. Great. And now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to tie off. And again, we're just using our very basic knot here. We could do a whole series on knots, but I think somebody has some really great videos on knots already. That when I was learning to string, I think I used those videos. The guy has a bucket and a couple of strings, and you can really see the way that he uses them. Some people say you should never use your starting clamp to cinch up your knots, but personally, it's always something that gets cut off anyway, so I really don't care. If you want to be super careful, what you would do is you would break the machine before tying off any knots. That's another way to tie your knots a little bit better. But I've done so many of these that I kind of just hold the machine in place. So we're going to cut off that excess tail, and now right away we're going to come down and we're going to pull tension on the fourth cross, and now I move my clamp from position 1 down to position 4, and now for the rest of the racket we're just going to continue on with that one ahead method like we've looked at, I think, in the other videos in our stringing series. So hopefully this video cuts and we get down towards the very end. I don't have too much more to actually say. So we're now down towards the end. I'm using my needle nose pliers to help me get through where there's a main string blocking the grommet. And as you do more and more stringing, that's something that you sometimes have to do. Occasionally, you will have to use, if you've really strung it up tight and there's not a lot of space, you will have to use your awl to give yourself a little more room. But whenever you can avoid that, you want to, but sometimes it's unavoidable. So we've come to the last one, and on the last one, I must have clicked the button, or maybe you didn't see it, but I clicked the button where I'm pulling that last one at 55. And, you know, whenever you've gotten a racket off the stringing machine, you always know that top and bottom cross are wiggling a little bit more than everything else. So by adding a little bit of tension to those last two, that's just a way to kind of help things out. So I did my final knot there. I just cut it out because we've already seen it. Before I remove those clamps and before I take the racket off, I'm going to do any kind of final straightening if I think I need to, but I don't want to do too much. I don't want to fiddle too much with the strings at this point because, again, for me, the more you fiddle, the more likely the strings may not play how they're supposed to play. So now we've removed our clamps, and now we're going to undo the little helpers on the side, unbreak the machine, okay? And then very easy to just unscrew one of our main supports, pull the racket off. We are now going to trim the knots, okay? This is a real technical thing. You can see I look like I'm holding something. I don't know. It's interesting. I always wonder what I look like when I do that. It's not pretty. And yeah, that's it. So that is how to string on a constant pole machine. Take care.